They told me my mother died in childbirth. The letter I found in her attic 30 years later told a different story. My name is Marlowe, and my entire life has been defined by a single tragic story, the story of my mother's death the day I was born. For 34 years, I carried the weight of that loss, believing my birth was the cause of her end. But last month, a single letter hidden in a dusty attic box shattered that story forever and forced me to question everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and myself. Before I tell you what was in that letter, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button. I grew up in a house where grief hung in the air like cigarette smoke, invisible but suffocating. My father, Camden, was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. Every photograph of him from before my birth showed a different person, eyes bright, shoulders relaxed, mouth curved upward. The man who raised me looked like he'd been carved from stone, worn down by decades of silent suffering. He'd wake up at 5:30 every morning, make his coffee in complete silence, and sit at the kitchen table staring at nothing for exactly 20 minutes before leaving for his job at the postal service. On weekends, he'd work in the garage for hours, organizing tools that were already organized, fixing things that weren't broken, doing anything to avoid being still with his thoughts. My grandmother, Bertie, moved in when I was 3. She wasn't the cookie-baking, warm hug kind of grandmother you see in movies. Bertie was all sharp angles and sharper words, her mouth perpetually pursed as if she tasted something bitter and couldn't quite swallow it down. She ran our household with military precision. Dinner at 6, not a minute later. Lights out at 9, no exceptions. Church every Sunday, and we had to be in the third pew from the front, always on the right side, because that's where the Whitmore family sat and that's where we would continue to sit. Her rules weren't up for discussion. Her word was law, and my father never once contradicted her, not even when I could see in his eyes that he wanted to. "Your poor father," she'd say, shaking her head whenever I laughed too loud or tracked mud across her pristine kitchen floor. "He sacrificed everything for you. Everything." The way she said it made it clear that everything meant my mother, and that I was the reason she was gone. Every year on my birthday, September 14th, we'd visit Rosewood Cemetery. While other kids were blowing out candles and tearing open presents wrapped in bright paper, I'd stand at a marble headstone that read, Coraline Elizabeth Whitmore. Beloved daughter. 1962 to 1990. Gone too soon. My father would kneel and place fresh white roses at the base, 12 of them, always white, always roses. He never cried, at least not where I could see. But his shoulders would hunch forward, and he'd stay there on his knees for exactly 10 minutes while Bertie stood behind me, her bony fingers gripping my shoulders like a vice, holding me in place as if I might try to run. "Your mother was beautiful," she'd say, the same script every year, delivered in the same flat tone. "She gave her life for yours. Never forget that." How could I? The guilt was woven into the fabric of my existence, stitched into every birthday cake, every celebration, every moment of joy that felt stolen because it came at the cost of her life. I learned early to be quiet, to take up as little space as possible. If I was the reason my mother died, the least I could do was not be a burden. I excelled in school because good grades made my father's eyes soften for half a second, and that half second of something resembling pride was worth all the late nights studying. I never asked for expensive things. I wore hand-me-downs from church donation boxes without complaint. I never threw tantrums or slammed doors or did any of the normal rebellious things teenagers do, because I was already guilty of the worst thing a child could do. I had killed my mother simply by being born. At my high school graduation, I scanned the crowd and saw my father sitting alone in the bleachers. Bertie had stayed home with one of her convenient headaches. I watched him clap politely when my name was called, and I wondered if he was imagining what it would have been like if Coraline were there instead of me. Would she have worn a yellow dress and cried tears of pride? Would she have thrown her arms around him afterward and told him how happy she was? Would she have loved him better than I ever could? When I started dating Jackson in college, I warned him early about my family situation. "I'm the girl whose mother died giving birth to her," I told him on our third date, testing the waters to see if he'd run. "It's kind of a heavy thing to carry around." But Jackson just squeezed my hand and said, "You didn't kill anyone, Marlowe. You were born. That's not a crime." It was the first time anyone had said that to me, and I cried right there in the middle of the Italian restaurant, mascara running down my face while confused waiters pretended not to notice. On my wedding day, I carried a locket with Coraline's picture tucked into my bouquet. I'd found it in my father's desk drawer years ago when I was looking for stamps, the only photo I'd ever seen of her. She was stunning, with waves of auburn hair that caught the light like copper and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She was young in the photo, maybe 19 or 20, wearing a simple white blouse and smiling at whoever was behind the camera. Bertie had caught me looking at it once and snatched it from my hands so fast the chain broke. "Don't go digging where you don't belong," she'd hissed, her face flushed with something that looked like panic. But she'd let me keep it after she calmed down, pressing it back into my palm with trembling fingers. Even she couldn't deny me that small connection to the woman I'd never known but had mourned my entire life. When I had my own daughter 3 years ago, I named her Coraline. My father cried when I told him, actual tears streaming down his weathered face, and he held my baby girl with shaking hands and whispered, "She would have loved you so much." I held my daughter in my arms that first night in the hospital, breathing in that perfect newborn smell, and I sobbed. Not tears of joy, though I felt that too. I cried because I finally understood what my mother must have felt in her last moments. The overwhelming love. The desperate desire to protect this tiny, perfect human. The horror of knowing she'd never see me grow up, never know who I became, never hold me the way I was holding Coraline. Or so I thought I understood. My father died last February. Heart attack, sudden and brutal, the kind that takes you before you even realize something's wrong. I'd spoken to him just the day before, our usual awkward conversation about weather and grocery prices, neither of us brave enough to venture into deeper waters. He told me the furnace was acting up again and asked if little Coraline had gotten over her cold. I said yes, she was better, and we should come visit soon. He said he'd like that. And then he said goodbye, and 12 hours later he was dead. When the hospital called, I felt the loss, of course I did. I felt it like a punch to the gut, that sudden understanding that I'd never talk to him again, never have the chance to ask the questions I'd been too afraid to ask my whole life. But mixed in with the grief was something else. Relief. And then crushing guilt about feeling relieved. What kind of person feels relief when their father dies? But the truth was, living with Camden had always felt like living with a ghost, and now he actually was one, and somehow that felt more honest than the decades of silence we'd shared. Bertie had passed 2 years earlier, her last words to me a whispered "take care of him," as she lay in her hospital bed, her body finally failing after 82 years of rigid control. I'd promised I would, though part of me wondered why I owed either of them anything. They'd given me a roof over my head and food on the table, but they'd also given me a lifetime of guilt and silence and the constant feeling that I was somehow not enough, that I could never make up for what my birth had cost. The house fell to me. Camden and Bertie's house, the only home I'd ever known, where I'd spent my childhood walking on eggshells and speaking in whispers. Jackson offered to hire someone to clean it out, to spare me the emotional labor of sorting through decades of accumulated life. But I said no. It felt like something I needed to do myself, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe I was looking for closure. Maybe I was looking for answers. Maybe I was just looking for some evidence that my parents had actually loved me, some hidden note or diary entry that would prove I'd mattered to them beyond being the daily reminder of their greatest loss. I started in March, going room by room with cardboard boxes and garbage bags. Each drawer I opened felt like trespassing. My father's sock drawer, organized by color with military precision even though he'd never served. Bertie's collection of pill bottles in the medicine cabinet, labeled and dated with her meticulous handwriting. The linen closet that still smelled faintly of her lavender sachets. I found greeting cards I'd made in elementary school, saved in a manila folder. I found my report cards going back to kindergarten. I found my father's discharge papers from the army, a service I barely knew about because he never talked about his past. These small artifacts of a life felt both intimate and completely foreign, like looking through a stranger's belongings. I saved the attic for last. I'd only been up there twice as a child. Once to retrieve Christmas decorations when I was 10, and once when I was 7 and playing hide and seek with a neighborhood kid. Both times, Bertie had appeared at the bottom of the ladder within minutes, her face flushed with anger and something else. Fear, maybe. Nothing up there for you, she'd snapped. Come down this instant. And I had, because you didn't disobey Bertie. Not if you knew what was good for you. The ladder groaned under my weight as I climbed up on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. The attic was smaller than I remembered, with slanted ceilings and one dusty circular window that let in a shaft of weak afternoon light. Boxes were stacked against the walls, labeled in Bertie's precise handwriting, tax documents 1985 to 1990. Camden's military service. Christmas, fragile. Everything organized, everything in its place, just like the rest of her life. I worked methodically, checking each box even though I probably should have just thrown most of it away. Tax documents from 35 years ago. Old Christmas ornaments wrapped in yellowed newspaper. A box of my baby clothes, impossibly tiny, with a note in my father's handwriting, Marlowe, 3 months. That one made me cry, this small evidence that he'd cared enough to save these things, to label them, to preserve some piece of my infancy. That's when I noticed it. A discoloration in the floorboards near the far corner, beneath the window. The wood there looked different, lighter, as if it had been replaced or perhaps just walked on less than the rest of the floor. My heart started beating faster, though I couldn't say why. Some instinct, maybe some deep understanding that I was about to find something significant. I pulled away the boxes blocking the corner and knelt down on the dusty floor. The floorboard was loose. When I pried it up with my fingers, it came away easily, too easily, as if it had been removed and replaced many times before. And beneath it, nestled in the dark space between the joists, was a small metal box, the kind you'd use for important documents or maybe cash you wanted to hide from burglars. It wasn't locked. The latch opened with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the silent attic. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, the edges soft and worn as if someone had handled it many times. On the front, in handwriting I'd seen 1,000 times in that locket photograph, in the signature on my birth certificate, in my dreams of what she might have written if she'd lived, were 4 words that stopped my heart. For Marlowe. When ready. I don't know how long I sat there in that dusty attic, holding the envelope with my mother's handwriting on it. Time felt strange, elastic, stretching and contracting in ways that didn't make sense. The shadows moved across the floor as the sun shifted outside that circular window, and I just sat there frozen, unable to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to rip it open immediately, to devour whatever words she'd left me. Part of me wanted to put it back, nail the floorboard down, and pretend I'd never found it. Because I knew, I absolutely knew, that whatever was inside that envelope was going to change everything. But I'd spent 34 years living in the shadows of secrets I wasn't allowed to question, and I was tired. So tired of not knowing, of living with half-truths and silences and the constant feeling that everyone around me knew something I didn't. My fingers tore the seal, and the sound of paper ripping seemed to echo through the empty house. The paper inside was thin, the kind that comes from an old composition notebook, torn carefully along the spiral edge. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, careful and looping and feminine. My mother's handwriting. I'd imagined it so many times, but seeing it real, seeing proof that her hand had held this pen, that she'd thought these words and chosen each one carefully, that she'd existed as a real person and not just a tragic story told at gravesides. I began to read. My darling Marlowe, if you're reading this, then I am either dead or you've finally found the courage to look for the truth. I pray it's the latter, though knowing Birdie, she's done everything in her power to keep this hidden. I didn't die giving birth to you, sweet girl. That's the lie they told, and I'm so sorry you've carried that burden. The truth is so much more complicated, and I need you to understand why I made the choice I did. I had to stop reading. The words were swimming in front of my eyes, my hand shaking so badly the paper rustled. My mother didn't die in childbirth. The entire foundation of my existence, the tragedy that had defined every relationship and every moment of my life, was a lie. I forced myself to keep reading. Your father, Camden, is a good man. Too good, perhaps. When we married, I was 19 and he was 22, and we were young and stupid and in love the way people are when they don't know what love actually costs. We talked for hours that day. She closed the store early, flipping the sign to closed, and locking the door behind us. She took me to her small apartment about 10 minutes away, a cozy space with plants in every window and books stacked on every surface. The view from her balcony showed the red rocks in the distance, glowing orange in the afternoon light. We sat on her worn couch, the kind with permanent indentations from years of use, and we filled in 34 years of blank space. She told me everything. About the guilt that had eaten her alive those first few years, how she'd wake up screaming some nights, desperate to hold me, to go back and make a different choice. About the therapy she'd needed just to function, to not drive back to find me, to accept the decision she'd made. About the photographs she'd collected of me from afar, birthday pictures she'd gotten from Camden in those early years before Birdie found out and cut off all contact, graduation announcements she'd found in the local paper online, my wedding announcement that she'd printed and framed and kept on her bedside table. She'd been watching my life unfold from a distance, loving me the only way she'd been allowed to. "I have boxes," she said, getting up and going to her bedroom. She came back with 3 shoe boxes filled with clippings, photographs, printouts from social media before I'd made my accounts private. "I know it's creepy. I know it probably makes me seem like a stalker. But it was the only way I could be part of your life. The only way I could know you were okay." I looked through the boxes, seeing my life documented through a stranger's eyes. My high school graduation, my college acceptance letter somehow obtained, my wedding photos. She'd been there in a way for all of it. Just never close enough to touch. I told her about my childhood, and I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her about the weight of her supposed death, about the guilt that had shaped every decision I'd made, about feeling like I owed Camden and Bertie something I could never repay. I told her about standing at her grave every birthday and apologizing for existing. I told her about the years of therapy I'd needed as an adult to deal with the complicated grief of mourning someone whose death I felt responsible for. "They never told you the truth?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Never even hinted?" "Never." I was 34 years old, and I found out from a letter hidden under a floorboard. They took it to their graves. The anger surged up again, hot and bitter. How could they do that? How could Camden raise me knowing I thought I'd killed you? How could Bertie let me carry that guilt? Coraline was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting in her lap. "I called him once," she said finally. "Camden. About 2 years after I left. I was in a bad place, drinking too much, thinking about dark things. I needed to hear your voice, even if you wouldn't know it was me. He put the phone near you while you were playing with blocks. You were 2 years old. You kept saying tower, tower over and over, so proud of yourself." She smiled through tears. "He told me you were happy, healthy, that you were the light of his life. And he asked me, begged me never to call again, because he couldn't bear hearing my voice and not being able to tell you I was alive. Because Bertie had convinced him it was too dangerous, that Shepard might still be looking, that any crack in the story might bring everything crashing down." I didn't know what to do with that information. It didn't erase the hurt, but it complicated it. Made it messier. More human. Camden wasn't just a coward who'd lied to me. He was also a man trying to protect his daughter, even if that daughter wasn't biologically his, even if it meant carrying an impossible secret until it killed him. "I'm so angry at them," I said. "At Bertie for orchestrating this whole thing. At Camden for going along with it. At you for leaving. I'm angry at all of you, and half of you are dead, so I can't even yell at you properly." I laughed, but it came out bitter. "And I'm angry at myself for being angry, because I can see why you all made the choices you made. I can understand it intellectually. But emotionally? I feel like I was robbed of something I can't even name." "You were," Coraline said simply. "You were robbed of the truth. Of agency. Of the ability to make your own choices about your own life. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Marlowe. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe all I was doing was protecting myself from having to face the consequences of my own mistakes." We talked about Shepard Kane, and she filled in details that the public records couldn't provide. "He'd been charming," she said, "the kind of man who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He'd been older, worldly, exciting in a way that her young husband off at war couldn't be. She'd known it was wrong, but she'd done it anyway, and she'd spent 34 years paying for that choice. Do you think he would have hurt me?" I asked. "If he'd known about me?" She considered this carefully. "I don't know. Bertie said he would, and she had evidence, connections, information I never saw. But I also think Bertie saw danger everywhere, especially when it threatened her perfect family image. Maybe Shepard would have been a threat. Maybe he would have been just another deadbeat dad who wanted nothing to do with a kid he didn't plan for. I'll never know, and neither will you, because Bertie made sure of that." I told her about little Coraline, her granddaughter, and I showed her photos on my phone. She cried looking at them, touching the screen like she could reach through and hold her. "She looks like you," Coraline whispered. "Same eyes. Same stubborn chin. She's named after you." I thought I was honoring a dead woman, but I guess I was honoring you all along. "Can I meet her?" The hope in her voice was almost painful to hear. "I know I have no right to ask. I know I gave up that right 34 years ago. But can I? Please? I wanted to say yes immediately, but I forced myself to pause. To think. I need time, I said finally. This is all so much, and I need to process it. I need to figure out what I'm feeling before I can make decisions about what comes next. But yes. Eventually. If we can figure this out, if we can find a way forward, then yes. You can meet your granddaughter. We didn't fix everything that day. We couldn't. You don't undo 34 years of lies and loss in one conversation, no matter how many tears you cry or how many apologies you offer. But we started. We exchanged phone numbers that we'd actually use, real contact information instead of hidden letters and surveillance photos. We made tentative plans for me to come back in a few weeks, to spend more time together, to keep building whatever this relationship was going to be. As I got ready to leave that evening to catch my flight home, Coraline grabbed my hand. Her grip was strong, desperate, like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. Marlowe, I need you to know something. Leaving you was the worst thing I've ever done. It's haunted me every single day for 34 years. But if I could go back, knowing what I know now about Shepard and the danger he posed, knowing what Birdie told me about his connections and what they were capable of, I think I'd make the same choice. Not because I didn't love you, but because I did. Because I do. More than anything. Because I thought it would keep you safe. I looked at my mother, this woman I'd mourned, this woman who'd sacrificed everything to protect me from a threat I'd never even known existed, and I realized something important. I don't have to agree with your choice to understand why you made it, I said slowly, working through the words as I spoke them. And maybe that's enough. For now. Maybe understanding is the first step toward forgiveness, even if I'm not ready for forgiveness yet. She nodded, squeezing my hand one more time before letting go. For now is good. For now is more than I ever hoped for. The flight home felt surreal. I sat in my cramped middle seat, watching the clouds pass below, and I tried to process everything that had happened. My mother was alive. My father wasn't my biological father. My grandmother had orchestrated an elaborate deception to protect me from a danger that may or may not have been real. My real father was dead, a criminal I'd never meet. Everything I'd believed about my life, my identity, my family, was different than I'd thought. But I was also still me. Still Marlowe. Still a wife and a mother and a daughter, even if the parameters of that last role had shifted dramatically. The facts of my life had changed, but the core of who I was remained the same. That realization steadied me, gave me something solid to hold on to in the midst of all this chaos. Jackson picked me up from the airport, and I fell into his arms in the parking garage and cried again. He held me and didn't ask questions, just let me feel everything I needed to feel. When we got home, I held little Coraline, breathing in her toddler smell of shampoo and graham crackers, and I understood my mother's choice in a way I hadn't before. I would do anything to protect this child. Anything. Even leave her if I thought it would keep her safe. Even lie to her if I believed the truth would hurt her. The realization didn't make me less angry at Coraline and Birdie and Camden, but it made the anger more complicated, more nuanced. It's been 5 months since I found that letter. 5 months since my world turned inside out and forced me to rebuild my understanding of everything. Coraline, my mother, has been to visit twice now. The first time was just for a day, tentative and awkward, both of us trying too hard and not knowing what to say. The second time was for a long weekend, and it was easier. Not easy, but easier. She met little Coraline, her granddaughter, who calls her Cora because grandma feels too complicated still, too loaded with expectations and history. Watching them together was bittersweet. My daughter, who has no memory of the lies and the grief and the decades of deception, just saw a nice lady who brought her books and sat on the floor to play blocks. My mother, who'd missed my entire childhood, got to experience a small piece of what she'd given up. They built towers together while I watched from the doorway, and I cried quietly, grieving for what could have been while also being grateful for what was. Coraline and Jackson get along well, which helps. He's good at asking the right questions, at filling awkward silences, at making everyone feel comfortable. He treats her kindly but not with kid gloves, which I think she appreciates. She's not fragile, despite everything. She's strong. She survived 34 years of guilt and loneliness and chose to keep living anyway. That takes a kind of strength I'm only beginning to understand. My mother and I are working on our relationship, but it's complicated. Some days are good. We text back and forth about books and recipes and silly things little Coraline said. Some days I look at her and feel rage that she left, that she chose to protect me in a way that hurt me so deeply, that she let me grow up with guilt that was never mine to carry. Some days I want to call her and tell her everything about my life, to make up for lost time. Some days I don't want to talk to her at all, and I let her calls go to voicemail because I'm not ready to pretend everything is okay. But we keep showing up. We keep trying. That's what healing looks like, I think. Not a straight line from broken to fixed, but a messy zigzag of good days and bad days, of progress and backsliding, of hurt that doesn't disappear just because you understand where it came from. I've started seeing a therapist who specializes in family trauma and complicated grief. Her name is Dr. Chen, and she's helping me understand that I can be angry at Birdie and Camden while also acknowledging they thought they were doing the right thing. That people can fail you terribly while still loving you in the best way they knew how. That life is rarely as simple as villains and heroes, that most people are just doing the best they can with impossible choices and imperfect information. She's also helping me understand that I'm allowed to grieve for the childhood I didn't have, for the mother who was alive but absent, for the father who loved me but lied to me, for the grandmother who protected me but hurt me in the process. That grief doesn't have to be rational or fair. That I can miss Camden and be angry at him at the same time. That I can love Coraline and resent her in the same breath. That contradictions are part of being human. I've also started asking questions about my own life, about the stories I tell myself, about the things I've accepted as truth without ever examining them. That's been hard. Uncomfortable. But necessary. How many other lies am I living with? How many other stories have I inherited without questioning? What else might I discover if I start looking under the floorboards of my own life? The biggest shift has been in how I see myself. For 34 years, my identity was built on a foundation of tragedy and guilt. I was the girl who killed her mother. The daughter who owed a debt she could never repay. The mistake that cost everything. Now I have to rebuild that identity without that foundation, and it's terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I'm not the daughter of Camden Whitmore, postal worker and silent sufferer. I'm the daughter of Coraline Bennett, who made a terrible choice and has spent 3 decades living with the consequences. I'm the daughter of Shepard Kane, criminal and stranger, whose genes I carry but whose life I'll never know. I'm the stepdaughter of Camden, who raised me as his own even when it meant living a lie. I'm the granddaughter of Birdie, who manipulated and controlled but genuinely believed she was protecting her family. I'm all of these things and none of them. I'm Marlowe, and I get to decide what that means now. Not based on a story someone else told me, not shaped by guilt that was never mine to carry, but based on who I choose to be moving forward. That's the gift, I think, that came wrapped in all this pain. The freedom to define myself on my own terms. Little Coraline asks about Cora sometimes, when she's going to visit again, if she can call her on the phone. I tell her soon, and we video chat every week now, my daughter babbling about her day while my mother watches with tears in her eyes and smiles that don't quite hide the grief. It's not the relationship any of us would have chosen, but it's the one we have, and we're doing our best with it. I think about Birdie sometimes, about whether she regretted her choices at the end. Did she lie in that hospital bed and wish she'd done things differently? Did she want to tell me the truth but couldn't bring herself to shatter the story she'd spent decades maintaining? Or did she die convinced she'd done the right thing, that the ends justified the means, that keeping me safe was worth any cost? I'll never know. Just like I'll never know if Shepard Kane would have been a danger or just another absent father. Just like I'll never know what kind of relationship I might have had with my mother if Birdie had made a different choice 34 years ago. The not knowing is its own kind of grief, sharp and persistent, a question mark that will never become a period. But I'm learning to live with uncertainty. To accept that some questions don't have answers, that some wounds don't fully heal, that some parts of my story will always be incomplete. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just what it means to be human, to live with ambiguity and contradiction and the complicated mess of loving people who hurt you and being hurt by people who loved you. My name is Marlowe, and I learned that the truth, no matter how painful, is better than a comfortable lie. I learned that the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we come from shape everything, and that sometimes you have to break those stories open to find out what's real underneath. I learned that family is complicated, that love and hurt often come packaged together, that forgiveness isn't a switch you flip but a choice you make over and over again, every day, sometimes multiple times a day. If you've ever questioned your own past or felt like a piece of your story was missing, I want you to know you're not alone. So many of us are walking around with incomplete narratives, with secrets our families kept to protect us or to protect themselves, with truths that were buried because someone decided we couldn't handle them. And maybe they were right. Maybe we couldn't have handled them when we were younger. But we're adults now, and we deserve the truth, even when it's messy and painful and changes everything. The lies our families tell us, they're rarely malicious. They're usually born from fear, from shame, from a desperate desire to protect us from things they think will break us. But living in the shadow of those lies breaks us too, just in a different way. It makes us strangers to ourselves. It makes us carry guilt that isn't ours, shame that belongs to someone else's story, grief for losses that never actually happened. You deserve the truth. You deserve to know your own story, even the ugly parts. Maybe especially the ugly parts. Because only when you know the whole story can you decide what it means, can you figure out who you want to be now that you know where you really came from. I'm still figuring that out myself. Still deciding what kind of daughter I want to be to Coraline, what kind of mother I want to be to little Coraline, what kind of person I want to be now that the foundation of my identity has cracked open. Some days I feel strong and clear and certain. Some days I feel lost and angry and scared. Most days I feel all of those things at once, cycling through them hour by hour, sometimes minute by minute. But I'm here. I'm alive. I'm telling my story, the real story, not the sanitized version that makes everyone comfortable. And there's power in that, in choosing honesty over comfort, truth over the easy lie that keeps everyone happy. If my journey resonated with you, if you've struggled with family secrets or complicated grief or the weight of stories you inherited without asking, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories of healing and truth. Leave a comment below sharing your experience. Tell me if you've ever found out something about your family that changed everything. Tell me how you're dealing with it, how you're rebuilding your identity around a new truth. I read every single one, and this community we're building together matters. We're all trying to figure out how to be honest in a world that often rewards comfortable lies, and we need each other for that. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who's living under the weight of their family's lies or carrying guilt that isn't theirs or mourning a story that might not be true, please hit that share button. Sometimes we all need permission to go looking for the truth, even when we're scared of what we'll find. Sometimes we need to know that other people have survived having their worlds turned upside down, that you can rebuild after everything you thought you knew turns out to be a lie. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here, for witnessing my journey, for making space for the messy, complicated truth instead of demanding a neat, comfortable narrative. And remember, you are more than the stories other people tell about you. You are more than the lies they told to keep you safe. You are more than the guilt they made you carry. You are more than the grief they assigned to you. You are the truth waiting to be discovered, and you deserve to know yourself fully, completely, honestly. Until next time, this is Marlowe, reminding you that the truth will set you free, but first it will break your heart. And that's okay. Hearts are strong. They can break and heal and break again and still keep beating. Just like us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And if you're carrying a secret that's too heavy, if you're living in the shadow of a lie someone else created, I want you to know that it's okay to go looking for the truth. It's okay to be angry about the lies. It's okay to grieve for the life you could have had if people had been honest with you. And it's okay to take your time figuring out what comes next. You don't owe anyone your forgiveness. You don't owe anyone your understanding. You only owe yourself the truth, and the courage to face it, and the grace to rebuild your life around it however you see fit. I'm still rebuilding. I probably will be for the rest of my life. But I'm doing it honestly now, and that makes all the difference. Take care of yourselves out there. And remember, you're not alone. We're happy for 3 years. And then his unit deployed overseas, and he was gone for 14 months. I was lonely. I'm not making excuses, just stating facts. I worked at the library, and a man came in every Tuesday to read the newspapers. His name was Shepard Kane. He was older, charming, dangerous in the way that makes young, stupid women feel alive. We started talking. Then coffee. Then more. By the time Camden came home, I was 2 months pregnant. With you. The world tilted sideways. Camden wasn't my father. My real father was someone named Shepard Kane, a stranger I'd never heard of, and my mother had had an affair while her husband was deployed. Every piece of my identity, every story I'd told myself about who I was and where I came from, was crumbling. I didn't know what to do. I loved Camden. I really did. But I knew the math wouldn't work, and I knew his mother, your grandmother Bertie, would know too. She'd always had a way of seeing straight through people's lies. I thought about telling him. I practiced the words 100 times. But then he looked at me with such joy, his hands on my barely there belly, talking about our baby and our family, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't break his heart. For 7 months, I lived in terror. Every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, I was certain someone would notice the dates didn't align. But no one did. Or if they did, they were kind enough not to say. I could picture her, young and scared and trapped by her own choices, watching the weeks tick by and knowing the truth would eventually come out. The letter continued. You were born healthy and perfect on September 14th. Camden wept with happiness. And then, 3 days later, Bertie came to the hospital room when he'd gone to get coffee. She knew. Of course she knew. She held you while I was still weak and bleeding, and she told me that Shepherd Kane wasn't just some charming stranger. He was dangerous, connected to people involved in things she wouldn't name but made clear were violent and criminal. She said she'd had him investigated the moment she suspected the truth. She said if he ever found out about you, he'd either take you from us or put all of us in danger trying to keep his secret hidden. My grandmother had known all along. She'd investigated my biological father, discovered he was a criminal, and then made a decision about my entire life without ever telling me I had a choice. Then she gave me a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. I could leave. Disappear. Let everyone believe I died in childbirth, a tragic but uncomplicated story. She'd raise you alongside Camden, keep you safe, keep you hidden from Shepherd and whatever darkness followed him. Or I could stay, tell the truth, and watch our whole world collapse. Watch Camden hate me. Watch Shepherd's people find us. Watch you grow up in the shadow of my mistakes. I had 6 hours to decide. 6 hours before they released me from the hospital. Bertie arranged everything, a death certificate somehow, through connections I didn't ask about. A closed casket funeral. A gravestone with my name on it. She gave me $3,000 and a bus ticket west. 6 hours. She'd had 6 hours to decide whether to stay and face the consequences or disappear and let everyone believe she was dead. And she'd chosen to leave. She'd chosen to let me grow up thinking I'd killed her. I left the hospital through the service entrance at 2 a.m. while my baby, while you, slept in the nursery. I didn't even get to say goodbye. That's the part that haunts me, Marlowe. Every birthday, every milestone, every moment I should have been there, I wasn't. Because I was protecting you the only way I knew how. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to understand. But I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and not a single day has passed where I haven't thought of you, wondered about you, hoped you were happy. Tears were streaming down my face now, dripping onto the yellowed paper and smudging the ink slightly. My mother was alive. After 34 years of mourning, of guilt, of standing at her gravestone on my birthday and apologizing for existing, she was alive. If you want to find me, I'm in Sedona, Arizona. I work at a bookstore called Desert Pages. I've kept my first name, I couldn't bear to lose that too, but I go by Coraline Bennett now. I don't know what Bertie or Camden told you. I don't know what kind of person you became. But I know you were loved, even if you didn't know I was loving you from 1,500 miles away. All my love, always, your mother. The letter slipped from my fingers and floated to the dusty attic floor. I sat there as the sun moved across that circular window, shadows lengthening around me, and I felt my entire existence crack open like an egg. Every memory, every moment of guilt, every birthday spent at that gravestone, every time I tried to be small and quiet and good enough to somehow make up for the death I'd caused, all of it was a lie. A carefully constructed fiction designed to protect me from a truth they decided I couldn't handle. My mother was alive. My mother had left me. My father wasn't my father. My grandmother was a manipulative liar who'd orchestrated the whole thing. And I was the daughter of a criminal named Shepherd Kane, a man I'd never heard of until 5 minutes ago. I don't remember driving to the cemetery. I must have climbed down from the attic, gotten in my car, driven the 15 miles to Rosewood Cemetery. But the next clear memory I have is standing over Bertie's grave with the letter clutched in my fist, my knuckles white from gripping it so hard. You lied to me, I said to the carved granite. My voice was shaking, barely more than a whisper at first. You lied to me every single day of my life. A groundskeeper was trimming hedges nearby, but I didn't care. Let him hear. Let the whole world hear. You let me think I killed her. Do you understand that? I thought I was the reason she died. I spent 34 years trying to be small enough, quiet enough, good enough to somehow make up for taking her life. And she was alive the whole time. You sent her away and you let me mourn a ghost. I was crying now, hot angry tears that blurred the words on her headstone. Beloved mother and grandmother. That was rich. What kind of grandmother does that to a child? What kind of love looks like 3 decades of lies? You let me stand here every year on my birthday and apologize to a gravestone for being born. You let me carry that guilt like it was my job, my purpose, my reason for existing. And for what? To protect me? To keep some family secret safe? You destroyed me to save me, and you never once asked if that's what I wanted. But Birdie wasn't there to answer. And Camden wasn't either. The 2 people who'd orchestrated this whole charade were both in the ground, forever beyond my reach, forever protected from my anger and my questions by 6 feet of earth and the finality of death. I wanted to rage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to dig them both up and make them face me and explain how they could do this, how they could lie so effortlessly, so completely for so long. Instead, I walked over to my mother's fake grave and stood there for a long time. Someone had left flowers, probably my father before he died, keeping up the charade even in his final days. I thought about all the times we'd stood here together, him on his knees and me behind him with Birdie's hands on my shoulders, and I wondered what he'd been thinking. Had he been mourning the woman he'd lost? Or was he mourning the lie he had to keep telling? I drove home in a daze, the letter still clutched in my hand. Jackson was in the kitchen making dinner, and little Coraline was in her high chair, smearing mashed sweet potatoes on her face and giggling. Normal life. Regular Tuesday evening. Except nothing was normal anymore and nothing would ever be regular again. Marlowe. Jackson looked up from the stove and his face went pale. Baby, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. I need to show you something, I managed. My voice sounded strange, hollow, like it was coming from somewhere far away. I handed him the letter. He read it twice, his face going from confused to shocked to horrified. Marlowe, oh my God. This is... Your mother is alive. She's alive, I whispered. My mother is alive, and she's been in Arizona this whole time, and my father wasn't my father, and my entire life has been a lie. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that reading it hadn't. I sank into a chair and put my head in my hands. Jackson knelt beside me, his warm hands on my knees. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do with this information that had detonated in my life like a bomb? I had no idea. I spent 2 days in a fog, trying to process, trying to decide, trying to figure out how to reconcile the mother I'd mourned with the mother who'd chosen to leave. Jackson was patient, bless him, taking care of Coraline while I sat at the kitchen table and stared at that letter until I'd memorized every word, every loop of her handwriting, every smudge and crease in the paper. On the 3rd day, I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid. I called my father's old friend, Dawson Reeves. Dawson had been around throughout my childhood, though always on the periphery, never quite part of the family but never quite separate either. He'd served with Camden overseas, and he'd show up for holidays sometimes, bringing me books and asking about school in that gentle way of his that made me feel like he actually cared about the answer. After I turned 18, I'd see him maybe once a year. Always with the same kind eyes and the same careful questions about how I was really doing, as if he could see through the performance I'd been putting on my whole life. If anyone knew the truth, it would be him. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. When I showed him the letter, his hands trembled so badly he had to set his mug down. Christ, he muttered, rubbing his weathered face. She actually did it. She actually wrote it down. You knew. It wasn't a question. He looked up at me, and the guilt in his eyes told me everything. Not everything. Not at first. Camden didn't tell me until you were about 5. He was drinking too much, way too much, and it all came spilling out one night when I stopped by to check on him. Your mother. The real father. What Birdie had done. How he was raising another man's child and lying to her face every single day. Dawson's voice cracked. He made me swear never to tell you. Said you were better off not knowing. Said the truth would only hurt you. Better off. My voice cracked. I thought I killed my mother, Dawson. I've lived with that guilt my entire life. Every birthday was a reminder that I destroyed my father's happiness. Every milestone felt stolen. How was that better? I know. God, Marlowe, I know. I argued with him about it so many times over the years. But he was terrified. Bertie had convinced him that if the truth came out, this Shepherd Kane would find you. And Camden he wasn't a strong man, not when it came to standing up to his mother. She had him convinced that keeping you in the dark was the same as keeping you safe. I wanted to be angry at Dawson too, but I could see the pain etched in every line of his face. He'd been caught in an impossible position, trapped between loyalty to his friend and concern for the child who'd been lied to her whole life. Tell me about Shepherd Kane, I said, forcing my voice steady. I need to know who my biological father is. Dawson sighed, long and heavy. After Camden told me, I did some digging. Quietly. Shepherd Kane was, maybe still is for all I know, connected to organized crime. Nothing flashy, nothing that would make the news. He was more of a fixer, the kind of guy who made problems disappear for the right price. Bertie wasn't wrong that he was dangerous. From what I could piece together, he had connections to some very bad people in Nevada and California. Did he know about me? I don't think so. From what I could find out, he left town about 8 months after your mother got pregnant. Moved to Nevada, from what I heard. There were rumors he got into some trouble out there, that maybe he ended up in prison or maybe dead. I never pushed it further because honestly, I was afraid of what I'd find. Afraid that digging too deep might somehow lead him back to you. I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb all of this. My biological father was a criminal, possibly in prison or dead, and I'd never known he existed. And my mother? Did you know she was in Sedona? He shook his head firmly. No. Camden never told me where she went. I'm not sure he even knew. Bertie probably made sure of that, kept them separated so there'd be no chance of contact, no risk of the truth coming out. Will you help me? I asked, and my voice came out smaller than I intended. Will you help me find out the whole truth? About Shepherd, about what really happened, about all of it? I can't. I can't do this alone. Dawson reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His palm was rough and warm, solid and real. Marlowe, I've waited 29 years for you to ask me that question. Yes. I'll help you find every single answer you deserve. It took 3 weeks to piece together the full story, and Dawson was true to his word, helping me navigate public records, old newspaper archives, and his own network of contacts from his military and police work. What we found was both more and less terrible than I'd imagined. Shepherd Kane was dead. He died in a prison in Nevada 7 years ago, serving time for racketeering and assault. Looking at his mugshot from his arrest 20 years ago, the dark eyes and sharp jawline, I could see traces of myself in his face. The shape of my nose, the set of my mouth, the way my eyebrows arched. It made my skin crawl, seeing myself in this stranger, this criminal who died never knowing I existed. Part of me felt robbed. I would never get to confront him, never get to ask him questions, never get to know what he was like beyond his criminal record. Part of me felt relieved. He couldn't hurt me now. He couldn't show up and complicate my life even further. He was just another ghost in a family full of them. The bigger revelation came when Dawson found the actual death certificate Bertie had fabricated for my mother. It wasn't a forgery in the traditional sense. It was real, issued by a real doctor who'd been on some kind of payroll. The doctor had died 15 years ago, taking whatever guilty secrets he'd held to his grave. But the paper trail showed how deep Bertie's connections went, how thoroughly she'd been willing to manipulate the system to maintain her version of the truth. She'd paid off a doctor, filed false documents, even arranged for the funeral and the gravestone. The level of planning and deception was staggering. Camden had known all of it. Every detail. From the beginning, he'd known that I wasn't his biological daughter, that my mother was alive, that the entire story was a fabrication. And he'd chosen to play along, to raise me as his own, to stand at that gravestone every year and let me believe I'd killed the woman he'd loved rather than tell me the complicated, messy truth. I don't know if that makes him a good man or a coward. Maybe both. Maybe neither. People are more complicated than simple labels, and death has a way of making everyone a saint in retrospect. In the end, though, all of that was just context. The real question remained, the question that kept me awake at night and made my hands shake when I thought about it too hard. What was I going to do about Coraline? My mother. The woman who'd been alive all along. I booked a flight to Phoenix in early April. I didn't call ahead. I didn't write. I just went. Jackson offered to come with me, but I said no. This was something I needed to do alone, and he understood. He always understood. Desert Pages was a small bookstore in uptown Sedona, tucked between a crystal shop and a gallery selling overpriced landscape paintings of the Red Rocks. The town was touristy and beautiful, all southwestern architecture and spiritual energy and people wearing turquoise jewelry. It felt like another world compared to the gray Midwest town where I'd grown up. Through the window, I could see shelves crammed with books, a tabby cat sitting on the counter, warm light spilling across worn wooden floors. And behind the register, helping a customer, was my mother. She was 54 now, her auburn hair streaked with silver, lines around her eyes and mouth that came from years of living. But she was unmistakably the woman from that locket photograph, just aged, just real, just alive. She was laughing at something the customer said, her whole face lighting up, and I realized I'd never heard her laugh before. Never heard her voice. Never seen her move through the world as a real person. I stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes, maybe longer, watching her through the glass like she was an exhibit in a museum. People walked past me, tourists with their cameras and shopping bags, and I just stood there frozen, trying to decide if I could really do this. My phone buzzed. Jackson checking in, "You got this. I love you." I typed back with shaking fingers, "I'm here. I'm okay. I love you." Then I pushed open the door. The bell chimed, a soft tinkling sound that seemed impossibly loud. Coraline looked up from the register, a customer service smile already forming on her lips. Our eyes met. The smile died. Her face went white, all the color draining out of it in an instant. The book she was holding fell to the counter with a thud. "Oh my God," she whispered. I tried to speak, but my throat had closed up. I just stood there, and she just stood there, this stranger who was my mother staring at this woman who was her daughter, and neither of us could move. She came around the counter slowly, like I might bolt if she moved too fast. Marlowe. My name came out like a prayer, like she couldn't quite believe I was real. Hearing my name in her voice broke something open inside me. "Hi," I managed, and it came out as a croak. I found your letter." And then, God help me, I started crying. Not gentle tears, but ugly gasping sobs that shook my whole body. 34 years of grief and anger and confusion came pouring out right there in that bookstore in Sedona, Arizona, while an elderly customer pretended not to watch and the tabby cat meowed indifferently from its perch. Coraline didn't ask permission. She just wrapped her arms around me and held on tight, and she was crying too, her whole body shaking against mine, whispering, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry," over and over like a prayer, like a benediction, like she could somehow erase 34 years of lies with repetition. We talked for hours that day. Please like, comment, and share. If this is your first time watching my video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you'll be notified whenever I post a new story.